Alright guys, I just wanted to record a quick video on something that's helped me a lot in my Christian walk, and I'm sure that Isabella would echo the same. It's called Oneness of Mind in Marriage. I think it's obvious, and it's a sad reality that many marriages in Christianity look like marriages that are of the world, marriages that aren't grounded in the faith, marriages that aren't grounded in the gospel, marriages that aren't focused upon Christ and his glory, marriages that aren't helped by the Spirit, not helped by the church, not helped by the Spirit. And a lot of Christian marriages sadly look, like I said, look just like the world. I've seen so many Christian marriages where there's just two people that have the same last name. They live in the same house, but they have completely different lives. They have different ways of thinking. They have different ways of assessing situation. They have different hobbies. They don't spend time together. They don't know each other all that intimately. They there's no fighting. Maybe there's no turmoil. Maybe there's peace, but it's really a false peace because they're just living different lifestyles. They're living separate lives, and they just come together. Some of them don't even sleep in the same bed sometimes, and that's just I can't wrap my mind around that. And there's no oneness of mind. There's really two individuals, two separate and independent minds that are just sharing a life together. This is the furthest thing from a Christ-centered, gospel-centered, and to be honest, a biblical marriage. We're called to be one flesh, the word says. We're called to leave our mother and our father and to cleave and to become one. Not just one physically, but one spiritually, one in mind. A oneness that the church is called to by Christ, to put on the mind of Christ, to have a oneness, a unity of mind, to be in one accord. If that's what Christ is calling the church to, and marriage is a reflection of Christ and the church, then marriages should be in one accord. Marriages should have oneness of mind. Marriages should have two people that are becoming to be likened toward one another as they're both becoming likened and transformed into the image of Christ. So oneness of mind is actually one of the most beneficial, one of the most richest, one of the most blessed things that comes from marriage. It's often been said that on this side of eternity, outside of your relationship with the Lord, your marriage should be the most sacred, the most special, the most joyful relationship that you have. Obviously, as a single person, it doesn't mean that you're not spiritual if you're not married, or you can't have in-depth relationships with your church if you're not married. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just speaking to married people at the moment. And this oneness of mind, this oneness of heart, this becoming one, this 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 beautiful display of the church and Christ, in a sense, walking under the same truths, Christian biblical truths, as it's displayed in marriage, is a good thing for marriages. It's helpful and it's really biblical, and that's why I started. Many Christian marriages, sadly, are not biblical marriages. And oneness of mind comes from daily habits. It comes from intentional work. It comes from having hard conversations, difficult conversations. Remember, as I said, there's some marriages that there's no problems, there's no issues. Everybody's happy, everybody's peaceful. Everyone has a smile on their face in the marriage because their lives aren't even interacting. They live different lives. So the peace, it's false peace. The joy, it's false joy. The security, it's false security, because they're never clashing. The iron is never meeting iron. So it's a false reality. And now we have other examples of marriages that aren't rich either, but they masquerade. They pretend to be biblical marriages because they have a pretend makeup that looks like biblical roles. So I'm just going to go through four scenarios that I've seen. The first one I kind of explained already. The marriage that's more like roommates, best buddies. There's no conflict. There's no real turmoil. There's no real struggles because it's a false peace. There's two different lives under the same roof, two different directions under the same last name. Might have family together, might not. But what we see here is that there's no depth to the marriage. There's no There's nothing sweet and beautiful and rich that comes from the marriage. There's not that experiential reality that comes from this mystery that's revealed in the gospel. Christ and his church. Christ giving up his life for his church, and the church submitting unto Christ, submitting to God, in submitting to Christ. That's never displayed. So the marriage is not yielding the benefits nor the fruit that it should be in their life, because they're not living their marriage under the banner of Christ. There's no communion. They have marital union, but there's a big difference between union and communion. There's a big difference between experiencing that joy of marriage and the fellowship that it is to be one in Christ. There's a big difference in that than sharing a house, sharing an address, sharing a last name. So this does not reflect the gospel. This, well, we just live different lives. We're so different. He does what he does. I do what I do. Or she does what she does. And I do what I do. And so forth. And there's no tension. There's no drama. But, we just figured out this is the way we do it. That's not the gospel. That's not the way Christ operates. That's not how Christ treats his bride. That's not how Christ is involved with his bride. That's not how the church responds to her bridegroom. That's not how she's being conformed to her Lord. So, this first scenario, roommates and best buddies, it's fake. It's not rich. There's no depth. There's no joy. The gospel is not taking fruit and not bearing fruit in the life. It's not taking hold of these individuals, and it's just a false peace, a false joy. It might be on the surface, but deep down, it's not living marriage to the standard of Christianity. This next one is it's a scenario that has a domineering husband in it. There's no conversations. I said it and that's it. Be quiet. You listen to what I say. There's no discussion. It's harsh. It's heavy-handed. And it appears biblical. It appears patriarchal. But it isn't. It isn't. And any form of intimacy, any form of joy, it's really just a forced submission on the woman's part. And if she's honest, she'll open up and say, I'm not happy. I'm not ever consulted. I'm not a helper because I'm never given the opportunity to help. I'm not an encourager because I'm never given the opportunity to encourage. And I have to respect, and I do that unto the Lord. But I really do not want to respect this man because he's harsh, he's domineering, he's heavy-handed. And this literally results just like group one. This is not reflective of the gospel. Christ is not a domineering shepherd. Christ is not a heavy-handed shepherd. Christ is gentle and lowly. Christ considers his bride. Christ sees her imperfections. Christ washes her in the word. Christ is actively tending to the needs of his bride in all the areas. He knows how to prune his bride. He knows how to encourage his bride. He knows how to be gracious. He knows how to be merciful. He knows at times how to give that nice little nudge to his bride. Christ is not a domineering shepherd, and Christ would not be, he's not a domineering bridegroom to his bride. So this domineering husband scenario, it's not the gospel. It's not reflective of the gospel. It's not in line. It doesn't fit with the gospel, and it pretends to be biblical because it pretends to be, this is a man's man and he's leading his home. No, he's not. He's not leading his home. He's dragging along his home. The next one is the flip side. Right? The first one, you have a domineering husband with the very fearful wife who's just scared to do anything, so she just goes along and calls it submission. That's not what it is. This next one is a controlling wife. And the husband seems gracious. The husband seems loving. The husband seems like he's a good guy and, he just wants to benefit his family. He seems like he's really doing his best, but that's also just a cover-up. Because he's living, like the proverb says, he's living on that rooftop because of that quarrelsome, difficult wife that he has. And on the rooftop, well, he's enjoying his life up there. But it's just, again, another masquerade. And the controlling wife is really not respectful. She's not a helper. She wants to be the leader. Her desire is for her husband, like Eve was told, and that's a desire to overtake, to assume his roles. And this controlling, sometimes our wife is sometimes outspoken, sometimes she's more secretive and controlling behind closed doors. She uses things to her advantage. She even uses good things to manipulate, good things to control, and to use even what God has given her as a one-up on her husband. and she kind of just puppets him around. And so this also is not reflective of the gospel. This is also falls short of what the biblical standard is for a wife, and it's also it masquerades as biblical because it seems like the husband is leading because he's being gracious and kind, but he's not. He's actually a soft leader, a weak leader. He's not a leader. I shouldn't even use that word. So you have the other extreme. You have a domineering husband in one scenario, and a very fearful, submissive wife that's not really submitting. Then on the other hand, you have a soft husband who's not leading, and it's all a show of grace and mercy, but it's not even that. He's just scared, and you have a controlling wife behind the scenes. Now, the reason that those things happen, it's because it's an overreaction to not being in one mind. It's an overreaction of wanting to make sure that we're keeping biblical roles or not trusting the Lord in our marriages. So we overreact, and we do, and marriages fall into these two categories. Obviously, the domineering husband can also be a distant husband, can also not be involved and just say, well, I'm making the decisions, sorry. And there's just a relational distance that takes place. Same thing in the controlling wife. There's a relational distance that takes place, a wedge that's driving between, because neither of these three scenarios, no one is walking in accord with the gospel nor the word. And so any joy they have, it's false. Any security they have is false. Any peace or happiness is false. They're just doing their best to not let the house of cards fall apart, and they're just trying to keep it up, but it's a house of cards. It's not really structured. It's not built on the foundation that is Christ. So the last one, and this is what I'm getting into, that oneness of mind, the last one is a marriage, a Christian marriage that reflects the gospel and the garden. The gospel, as we know, is that covenantal love that Christ has for his bride. He dies for her. He gives his life for her. He lays down all of his life in sacrifice for his bride, and his bride, out of love and out of a effectual love that's given to her, she submits, she comes along, she respects, and she's being conformed to his image. And so Christ and his bride, that's the gospel. And what we need to see there is that husbands are called to model Christ in that love, that sacrificial love, and women are said to model the church in that submission to the Lord. As they're submitting to him, they're submitting ultimately to God. So husbands should be reflecting Christ and his covenant love, that he's loving his bride, that he's being sacrificial, that he's leading, he's doing the hard work, he's doing the difficult work, he's laying down his life, he's laying down his comforts, and he's doing what's necessary, not in a domineering way, not also in a soft way, but in a biblical way. And wives reflect that as they're submitting, respecting, encouraging, and being a helpmate. And what we actually see here is this mystery is revealing the gospel. And God has given us, even in Adam and Eve, a beautiful blueprint for what is marriage. Adam was called to tend to the garden. He was called to take dominion, the cultural dominion, which is to cultivate the garden, to nurture, to work, and to keep the garden, and to extend the garden to the ends of the earth. And his wife was a part of that garden. In fact, though his wife was his first garden. So when we see in God's original creation, we see Adam as a gardener, Adam as a cultivator. Adam was the one that was called to prune, to work with his hands, to help flourish and develop his garden, his bride primarily as well. And he was called to lead her, to protect her, and to lay down his life for her. And in doing so, he would have attained glory for himself, his family, his wife, and his family, and the generations to come. He failed, obviously, but there we still see that blueprint where Adam is called to do that difficult work, and Eve was supposed to be his helper, to carry along that task alongside of him, to be his confidant, to come alongside of him, to benefit him, to encourage him. If he needed help, she was to be there to respect him, to support him. And as she did that, his ability to care for her would have increased. His ability to nurture her would have increased, because she's lightening the load in some areas, and then he comes in and supplies that grace where she's helping out. And it would have been a mutual benefit to that relationship in the garden. So as we consider these things, the gospel, Adam and Eve, this oneness of mind is achieved when the husband the gardener is intentionally and specifically doing things. He's specifically cultivating his bride, working in her, giving her the fruit of the Spirit in his dealings. He's reading the word to her. He's nurturing her. He's washing her in the water of the word. When he sees shortcomings, he's not a madman and just snips away at his garden. No, he, with expert and precise precision, he prunes and he cuts back just enough, not too much where it hurts and it ruins his garden, but not barely anywhere there's no fruit that comes from it. He knows how to deal. He doesn't let the weeds of his garden get too big. He plucks them early on. He plants gospel seed there. He's feeding his bride Christ. He's doing the work of a gardener in his bride's life, and she's the benefit, and he's receiving mutual benefit because he's building up his helper. He's building up himself in that, and there's oneness of mind that's taking place. And this woman will follow that. She'll receive the benefits of that, and there'll be this, again, mutual benefit that is happening. 99% of success in marriage comes from a man being a gardener in his bride's life, doing these difficult tasks, having these hard conversations in a way that's godly and gentle, yet assertive and intentional. So what's oneness of mind? Husbands and wives need to have oneness of mind in their schedule, in their hopes for the future, and their desires for their kids, and their parenting methodology, and their goals, and their decision making, even in conflicts. The end result at the end of a conflict should be oneness of mind. Hey, we at the end of the day we come together and we make a decision, even in our conflicts, that unites our minds together. It's a living out of the gospel, as we're to put on the mind of Christ. The church is to take that in and be conformed to Christ. So to marriages, so are marriages, that they're called to be one flesh, in one mind, in one accord. And this is the living out of Christ's lordship. Christian marriages need to be distinct. Christian marriages need to not look like the world. There needs to be something unique about them. And the uniqueness is the gospel. The uniqueness is bringing Christ to bear over every area of the marriage, whether it be from, as I said, how to do family worship, to intimacy, to conversations. But husbands and wives need to be communicating with each other. Husbands and wives need to have the freedom of conversation and bringing things up. Husbands and wives need to be exploring each other's hearts and each other's minds. Husbands need to be exposing their wife to what they're learning so that they're keeping that oneness of mind. Wives need to be exposing their husbands to what they're learning or dealing with to keep that oneness of mind. You see, when we have this oneness of mind, then you realize, oh man, this Christian couple is unique. They're not at odds with each other. They don't disagree with each other on every matter. They're almost the same person. They're almost unique. They're almost displaying this oneness of mind that's not seen in the world. And it actually displays the glory of God in marriages. So as you labor in your marriage, husbands, be that gardener that cultivates and works and keeps and tends to your garden that is your wife. Prune in a way that's loving. Ask questions. Get into your wife's mind and her heart. Find out who your bride is. Find out what she's like. And shape her mind with your mind and become one mind. Lead her in a way that honors the Lord and represents Christ's leading of his bride. Don't be domineering and don't be soft. Christ was neither. And wives, as you seek to be a helpmate to your husband, as you seek to be an encourager, as you seek to compliment him and to submit to him, even when you have to bring up hard conversations or deal with him with his shortcomings, do so in a way that's not nagging. Do so in a way that sounds respectful, in a way that's still encouraging him at the end of the day, in the way that's still supporting him. Example, hey, I know what? I kind of see that you're falling short here, and I just would love to encourage you in that. I would love to come alongside you. How can I help you to achieve this role that you're called to achieve in your leadership? Is there something that I can do to help you? And as you're doing that, your husband will see your love for him, your respect for him, your submission to him, and he will be encouraged to lead you, to guide you, and to take you to where he's called to as the gardener of your heart. So oneness of mind, oneness of heart in the gospel of Christ by the power of the Spirit as the word leads. May we do this to the glory of God. I just would pray that our church would have a bunch of marriages that have oneness of mind, not a bunch of roommates living together, not a domineering husband who just has a wife he's dragging along, not a soft husband who his wife is manipulating and controlling, but beautiful, gospel centered, Christ exalting marriages that share one mind and one heart. That's my prayer. And the strength of our marriages is the strength of our church. Hope that was a blessing. Ask questions. I'm here.